Recording in progress.
Chair Williams, we're ready to begin.
Okay, thank you. All right, welcome to this regular meeting of the Planning Commission this Tuesday evening, December 13th. I now call this meeting to order. Ashley, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Williams,
Present?
Vice Chair Nutter,
Present.
Commissioner Nugent,
Present.
Commissioner Patel,
Present.
and Commissioner Wiggins is absent.
All right, thank you. I want to be sure it's noted that Commissioner Nugent is joining us remotely. And as required for public notification, we're also noticing the location. So he's in an office at 1010 West Camino Sagasta, if I think I said that right, in Green Valley, Arizona, 85622. An agenda has also been posted at that location. So welcome, Commissioner Nugent. You can hear us okay? Great. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. We're excited to be here in person and also to have options for virtual participation, obviously. For those attending in person, please complete a yellow request to speak slip and hand it to the clerk. And if participating remotely, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and you will be called upon at the appropriate time. If calling in via your phone, press *9 to raise your hand, and when called upon, press *6 to unmute yourself. These options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment for that period. I'm sorry, until I close the public comment period for that item. I just realized that, thank you, that I forgot to do the Pledge of Allegiance. I just rolled right into that remote notification about Commissioner Nugent. So please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Skipping over something. Let's see, so where was I? We talked about the how to call in or Zoom in during the public comment period. So now moving on through the agenda to the consent calendar. Can you please read the consent calendar items, Ashley?
Yes. Item number 1, Planning Commission meeting minutes approval. Approve the minutes of the special meeting of November 8th, 2022, and the regular meeting of November 8th, 2022.
Okay, so at this time, I want to ask if there's any member of the Planning Commission that would like to pull this item from the consent calendar for discussion. Okay. I also want to note that I think as I go through things, I'll call on Commissioner Nugent last as Ashley typically does in-person speakers first and then does Zoom speakers when we have public comment. So I'll use that same mode in this situation. Okay, so on the matter of the consent calendar, there's no changes to that. And I guess if any members of the public would want to comment on the consent calendar at this time, now would be the time to make your comment. This is for consent items only, which is the meeting notes.
Chair Williams, we have no public commenters.
Okay, great, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the public comment period.
Sorry, Chair Williams,
yes.
we need a vote.
Okay, thank you. I'm just rolling right through things tonight. In a hurry, I guess. I would like to take a roll call vote for approving the meeting notes.
Through the chair, we would need a motion and a second before a vote. Thank you.
I'll motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. Can I have a roll call vote on that?
Yes, Chair Williams,
Approved, or yes, I should say.
Vice Chair Nutter,
Yes.
Commissioner Nugent,
Yes.
Commissioner Patel,
Yes.
and Commissioner Wiggins is absent.
Okay. All approved on the meeting notes. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to move on to the public comment period. At this time, members of the public wishing to comment on any item that's not appearing on the agenda may address the Planning Commission at this time. State law prevents the Planning Commission from taking any action on any matter that's not on the agenda. Your comments may be referred to staff for follow-up, though. Public comment is generally limited to a total of 15 minutes. However, that is subject to the Commission's discretion and can be extended if the Commission wishes to do so. So, are there any members of the public that would like to speak on something that's not on the agenda?
Chair Williams, we have no public commenters.
All right. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the study session. So, Ashley, would you introduce this item, please?
Yes. Item number 2, pre-application review for a proposed 6-story office residential mixed-use building at 500 East 4th Avenue, Block 20.
Okay, thank you. So it should be noted that this is a pre-application study session to learn more about this proposed development and receive public comments and to provide input and comments back on the proposed project and its design. The order of this item is staff presentation, applicant presentation, clarifying questions from the commissioners, public comments, and then commission deliberation. This item is a study session, so there will be no action taken on the proposal this evening. And the applicant will be given up to 15 minutes to present, and all other members of the public will be given 2 to 3 minutes to speak, depending on the number of speakers that we end up with. So, Rendo, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Williams and members of the Planning Commission, Rendell Bustos, Senior Planner and Staff Planner for Agenda Item 2 this evening, a study session for 500 East 4th Avenue, Block 20 pre-application. So beginning with the project location, here's an aerial showing the project's vicinity, which is in the city's downtown area, east of the railroad tracks, just shown here in orange. The subject block is bound by the streets of East 4th Avenue, South Delaware Street, East 5th Avenue, and South Claremont Street. And this map also illustrates the location of the downtown Caltrain station, shown here in red, which is about a quarter of a mile from the project site. The parcel area is approximately 1.16 acres, or about 50,499 square feet. The site has a general plan land use designation of downtown retail core support and is zoned CBD/S for Central Business District support. This slide also shows the variety of existing uses, which includes an existing Taco Bell, a restaurant use, a vacant lot formerly occupied by a gas station, a preschool, the San Mateo Gardeners Association, a single-family dwelling, as well as the Japanese American Community Center, or JACC, which qualifies as an historic resource. The site is surrounded also by a variety of different uses, as illustrated here. Other recently approved or projects under construction or recently constructed projects are also immediately adjacent to the project site, which includes the recently approved Block 21 development and the city's Kiku Crossing apartment building and associated parking garage. So as a result, the site is surrounded by other mixed-use developments, as well as commercial uses to the north and northwest. And to the south and southeast are existing service commercial and industrial uses, as well as lower density residential uses. So now moving to the project description, Block 20 is a proposed 6-story mixed-use building with a combined floor area of approximately 216,000 square feet. The proposed uses include about 142,000 square feet of office uses on the first 3 levels, as well as 86 residential units, which should be for rent, ranging from studios to 2 bedrooms on the upper 3 levels. The project proposes to devote 15% or 9 units to the very low income category, which avails the project of state density bonus law, as well as concessions and waivers, which will be discussed in further slides. So now moving to the applicable codes and policies from both the local and state level. Beginning with the general plan, the project, as noted previously, is zoned CBD/S, which is consistent with its general plan land use designation of downtown retail core support. The bulk of CBD/S parcels are located east of the downtown, east of the railroad, and are generally meant to provide complementary uses to the downtown core. The zoning code also lists a list of development standards, which are summarized here. It should be noted that certain standards have been requested to be modified through state density bonus law. So with respect to local policy documents, the site is subject to the city's downtown area plan or downtown plan, which places the site in the central Claremont sub-area. The downtown plan recommends retail uses and sidewalk improvements for increased connectivity to the downtown core for sites that are in this sub-area. Next, the pedestrian master plan guides developments generally to improve the public realm. The pedestrian master plan recommends an overall sidewalk width of at least 16 feet, which the project does not comply with at this time fully at every frontage, given its compliance with the zoning code's requirement for 0 setbacks. And lastly, the bicycle master plan requires a Class 2 bike lane along East 5th Avenue, as well as a Class 3 bike boulevard along South Claremont Street. And lastly, moving to state law, I do want to note that the project is not subject to the Housing Accountability Act, or HAA, given that it is less than 2/3 housing. As referenced earlier, however, the project is subject to state density bonus law, given that it devotes 15% of the base density to the very low income category. So this yields the project an up to 50% density bonus, as well as opportunities to request concessions and waivers, which are listed here. And lastly, staff wanted to highlight some upcoming legislation. So once the project does come back to the commission, Assembly Bill 2097 will be effective January 1st of this coming year, which prohibits the city from imposing parking requirements for this project, since it is within a half-mile of a major public transit stop. So shifting now to the 3 discussion areas that the staff would like the commission's input on. These are the proposed uses, the building design, as well as other aspects as necessary. So to convey the specific questions regarding the project's uses, staff would like to highlight, once again, that the project proposes a mixed-use building consisting of office uses at the lower half of the building, as well as residential uses at the upper half. And the specific questions regarding this topic are whether the applicant should propose ground floor uses, ground floor neighborhood serving uses, which would include retail, restaurant, a child care facility, or personal service uses, and if so, where? So to consider these questions, staff will discuss the existing context to aid the commission's feedback, as well as provide background on applicable codes and policies that can help support the commission's feedback. So the existing setting, so this image shows again the variety of existing uses that surround the site. So in particular, the site is along a transition of other mixed-use projects and commercial uses to the north and northwest, as well as lower scale developments and residential uses to the south and southeast. So when considering this topic, the commission should also consider the applicable codes to support their recommendation, policies and codes. So first, the general plan, for example, outlines specific policies surrounding the provision of retail adjacent to residential uses to achieve an overall good mix of uses. So it promotes retail and neighborhood serving uses and childcare uses. The downtown area plan or downtown plan supports these policies by encouraging ground floor commercial uses that promote pedestrian activity. And then lastly, the zoning code provides a list of permitted uses, which includes office, residential, retail, and other commercial uses. Staff would like to highlight, though, that these uses are not required uses in this zone. So bringing it back to the project and how the project fits into these policies, the proposed uses include, again, office and residential uses, but do not include any provision of ground floor retail or neighborhood serving uses. Staff would note also that the existing uses on the block do include some neighborhood serving uses, including a restaurant, a preschool, as well as a community center use. So to recap, does the commission encourage provision of ground floor neighborhood serving uses? And if so, along what frontage or frontages would they encourage these uses to be located? And so shifting now to the building design, here are the questions that staff would like the commission to comment on in the context of building design. Generally, the questions have to do with certain improvements the applicant should make to improve the overall style and transition to adjacent uses. So to help convey this topic, staff will cover the architectural style and its defining elements, as well as discuss the existing setting to help the commission consider these revisions. So the proposed architectural style, as outlined in the staff report, is Mediterranean. The applicant and the architect are present this evening and can provide more detail on the proposed design, but at a high level, staff wanted to highlight certain elements. So first, at the building's base, the design incorporates arched windows, neutral colors, and bronze detailing, as well as several step backs that continue to the upper floors. At the residential levels, the design incorporates additional bronze detailing through railings and traditionally framed windows. And moving upward, additional elements that are consistent with the Mediterranean style include a tower feature, tiled roofing, as well as roof corbels. So these elements are carried throughout the building design along all frontages as shown in these renderings. So when considering revisions, the commission should also consider the neighborhood context. So specifically in the context of recently approved or constructed projects immediately adjacent to the site, including other mixed-use developments by Windy Hill as shown here, as well as the city's Cuckoo Crossing development and the adjacent Fifth Avenue parking garage. So as is discussed in the agenda report, the project, while different in architectural style, does employ similar massing and facade articulation as these recent developments. And so contrastingly, in addition to the more contemporary designs, there are other traditional low-scale residential uses that exist southeast of the site that appear or would appear less than half of the proposed project's building height. And to help illustrate the height differences, here's an excerpt from the city's height map that shows the vicinity's maximum building heights. So this shows that the site is along a transition between higher 50-foot height projects to the lower height limits to the southeast that range from 24 feet to 35 feet. So given this context, staff would like the commission to comment on whether the applicant should add or remove certain design treatments. In addition, in what ways could the applicant improve the transition to lower height uses to the southeast based on massing and height changes? And lastly, are there other revisions the commission would encourage to help further the project's relation to the downtown area? And so for the final item, briefly, staff will request that the commission consider and comment on other aspects that the applicant should consider for the formal application. So staff anticipates that this would require a site plan architecture review, a site development plan application, as well as a tentative parcel map. And the project will also undergo extensive environmental review in accordance with CEQA. And so staff would anticipate scoping an environmental impact report, or EIR, given the proposed demolition of the existing historic resource at 4 and 5 South Claremont Street. So in addition to commission feedback, the applicant can also consider community input through the public comment letters received thus far, as well as the project's November 3rd neighborhood meeting, in which comments regarding traffic, the amount of office floor area, design, and retail uses were shared. And so lastly, on next steps, the applicant will have an opportunity to revise the application based on commission and community input in order to file the formal planning application. So to recap the discussion items for this evening's study session, the first topic relates again to the proposed uses. And second, the second discussion topic, I should say, relates to the project's building design. And lastly, are there other topics that the applicant should consider when preparing their formal application? So with that concludes staff's presentation. Happy to take questions that the commission may have. The applicant is present this evening and will be providing a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So at this time, would the applicant like to come up and make a presentation? Great.
Good to be with you. Thank you, Rendell. It's always good to follow Rendell. He's so thorough. There really isn't much for me to present on other than to maybe go through some of the pretty pictures. And so we can certainly do that. It's good to be with you tonight. This project, just kind of to give you our, the initial vision, when we first approached this site, and I hate to commit to it being our last hurrah in this area, but it appears that it'll be close to that. The Japanese Cultural Center, as well as the daycare, are two uses that, from a developer perspective, we kind of see those as protected uses in the community. And what I mean by that is we started with, are those buildings meeting the needs of those individuals? And if they are, how do we deal with that? Because there's no way we're tearing down the Japanese Cultural Center if they're not a part of it, and there's no way we're tearing down a daycare that serves the central neighborhood if they're not a part of it. So that's where we started, and that was a couple years ago. And so we worked with the Japanese Cultural Center and Safari Kids to understand what their needs were and to work on a plan so that we could relocate them within the community. And so we're an active participant with both of those individuals in doing that. So the Safari Kids, they had a very tough go. They started right during COVID. They didn't make money for the first year, but now they're doing fabulous. And so they just opened a location, Redwood City, and the plan here is to expand. I'm not allowed to say too much, right? But the plan is to expand in San Mateo with a larger location. And the Japanese Cultural Center, it was a more in-depth conversation with them. It took about a year working with their board and other members to understand what their long-term vision is for the Japanese Cultural Center versus what it's done in the past, how the current facilities meet their needs or don't meet their needs because they're aging, and then how they can support their community into the future. So ultimately, their board decided that it was a better opportunity to sell to us and to use those resources to expand and build a Japanese Cultural Center with new facilities that'll be able to, extend the life of the Japanese Cultural Center for decades to come, whereas the current buildings are in tough shape and requires significant reinvestment. So with that, we decided, okay, I think we can potentially build a building here. Now, the other issue is that our other buildings were not transitions to the residential neighborhood as much as this building is. And part of our community feedback that we got from members of the neighborhood is they want us to emphasize that a little bit more in some ways, specifically on Fifth Avenue. But you're gonna see, I'm gonna skip a bunch of slides, you already know a lot of this stuff here. So we're already working on some of those ideas and concepts, but we really look forward to getting your feedback tonight to make sure we're going in the right direction. But the transition into the neighborhood here is important, and it's one of the reasons that the architectural style, I would say, is a significant departure from the other buildings that we've done just a block over. And certainly, it's a significant departure from what Kiku Crossing is. Kiku Crossing, much more contemporary. And so the reason behind that is because we do see ourselves as this transition point between these contemporary buildings that are a block away and, really a not historical, but a very long-standing suburban residential area. And so, we have some two-story apartment buildings across from us. We have a Spanish-style home across, and then, of course, there's a myriad of architectural styles going up and down the streets. But we felt this would be the best architectural style to transition between the contemporary and the residential neighborhood. And so our goal, what we set out to do, was to design one of the most attractive Mediterranean buildings that we've seen in the Bay Area. Now, whether we've achieved that goal, designs are always evolving. This is our initial submittal, and based upon feedback we got from the neighborhood, we're already making some changes, but that was the initial goal. So this is the corner of Claremont and 4th Avenue. So this faces Kiku and also Block 21. That's a zoom in on that corner. And this is the corner of Delaware and 4th Avenue. So this faces the Jiffy Lube and the two-story apartment community on the corner of 5th and Delaware. And so that gives you, an idea. What we did here is we pulled in the corner at 4th and Delaware, and one of the neighborhood comments we got was to do something similar at 5th and Delaware. One of the things that we were educated on from the community is that 5th is actually a pretty well-used and significant pedestrian pathway into B Street, more than 4th, which I didn't really anticipate. And so based upon that feedback, we're already working on how do we make 5th more interesting, and you'll see that when we get to that rendering. You'll see the old version, but not the new one here. So this is the corner of 5th and Claremont. And so, you can see the difference between the corners is pretty significant. And so, we're already looking at how to improve that. You'll see that on the majority of the Delaware side of the building, on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the office space, are exterior balconies. And so that serves to pull the mass of the building away from the residential area. Oops, I went the wrong way. So like here at the corner of 5th and Claremont, you can see little people standing up there on the 2nd floor. And then, 3rd floor. And then you'll see that the apartments pull back even further after that. The one item to mention is that we don't have the ability to tier the apartments because it starts to turn into it makes it very difficult to lay out the apartment levels. It starts to turn into a wedding cake, and it starts to get kind of tough. So we try and do that as much as we can on the bottom. Another thing to note, the sidewalk on Delaware is 9.6. We got some community feedback on that. That was not well received, and so we will be expanding that sidewalk to be the same as Block 21, which is 13 something. Still not, where we'd love it to be, but when you look at all the competing uses, vehicular, bicycle, et cetera, that will be the same sidewalk width as Block 21, and so it'll show some continuity there. Let's see. Am I going the right direction? Yes. This is 5th and Delaware. So again, that's that corner. Do I have a red dot? I don't. It's good. I didn't use it too much. That's that corner that we're looking at on the right-hand side there. This is just an overall site plan. Again, you can see from an aerial view what that corner was looking like on 4th, and we're looking at how to maybe do that also on 5th. Not much to see here. That sidewalk on Delaware is going to get bigger, but otherwise, this is all in keeping with the downtown pedestrian plan. That's all I have for you. Again, Rendell made it easy. He covered 99.9, and so any questions, feel free to let me know, but that's all I have for you tonight.
All right, well, thank you. At this time, we could go ahead and see if there's any clarifying questions from planning commissioners. Commissioner Ebnetter, do you have any questions at this time?
Could we briefly go over the concessions and a little bit of understanding on general feeling? Randall, please.
Sure. So through the chair, the two concession requests made at this time. The first is to exceed the maximum building height, which is 55 feet. And so the applicant's requesting a 75-foot height limit, so an increase of 20 feet. The second concession would be to increase the floor area ratio from 3.0 to about 4.28. So staff hasn't done a really thorough analysis yet of the density bonus letter, given that it's a pre-application, but some of the findings that we'd have to make in order to grant the request would be that there's a cost reduction associated with the concession, and specific to the height increase, we'd have to find that it does not conflict with state law, or Measure Y, our voter initiative. But those are two concession requests that were granted for Block 21, a similar project, but that thorough analysis has not been completed yet.
Okay. So per the data sheet, well, I think I ask this question once a month. It's not, this project is not an HAA project.
Correct. It's not a project subject to the Housing Accountability Act. It's less than two-thirds housing.
Yet you get the state bonuses.
Correct. So the provision of 15% at the very low income category does avail the project of state density bonus law.
I'm not trying to hold this project up. I'm just trying to understand the difference of an HAA and this application, how it can be modified or rejected.
So the HAA provides protections to projects if they do qualify as a project under the HAA, that the city cannot reduce the project's density or deny the project based on non-objective standards. So in theory, the commission can provide commentary or move to deny the project or reduce the project's density based on non-objective standards or subjective standards. With that said, though, if the commission's moving toward making that commentary, staff would still ask for the applicant's benefit, the reasons why. And so if they could point to a policy, even that if it is subjective, just so that the applicant can have an opportunity to revise it when it does come back for a public hearing.
Okay. So also for the data sheet, the city will be getting the same amount of housings with or without the commercial. You still build out to the same maximum here.
Correct. So the amount of density is not related to the amount of commercial uses on site.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that was my questions for staff now. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Patel, do you have questions?
I do. I have a question for staff. I was hoping you could help us understand the build-to-line requirement in the zoning code and how that relates to the pedestrian master plan. Because I would say a question I commonly get from my neighbors, I live in this neighborhood, but on the opposite side, is about the pedestrian sidewalks in the downtown. And I get a lot of questions about how come they're not wider, how come we can't ask for them to be wider. And as I was going through the documentation for this project is when I really started to understand that we have a build-to-line requirement, but we also have this pedestrian master plan. And so what happens when we require properties to be built to the property line, and then the existing sidewalk is less wide, narrower, than the requirements in the pedestrian master plan? Whose responsibility is it to widen that sidewalk and how to conform to the pedestrian master plan?
Yeah, so there's a few pieces at play with sidewalk design. So not every zone has build-to lines. Other zones have setback requirements, which require the building to be a distance from their property line. It's really the opposite case here. When you're in the downtown or downtown support district, we want projects to meet the front property line so that pedestrians are able to engage with storefronts, et cetera. So that is the case with this project where there is a 0 lot line requirement, although the code does allow projects to step it back, on a voluntary basis, provided it's for open space or landscaping. In contrast, the pedestrian master plan does require a separation between the building and the sidewalk edge for a total overall width that ranges, in this project's case, it's 16 feet. There is a conflict between the two with this zone in that the zoning code will say build your lot line. The pedestrian plan would say, to step it back to provide an overall sidewalk width. Another way the city could achieve a wider sidewalk, as you've indicated, is the city could, in theory, widen its sidewalks, but then that would narrow our roadways. So I don't know that there's a lot of capacity for public works or staff to support that. So they are in conflict, albeit it's not an HAA project, so staff and the commission could provide commentary to encourage that sidewalks be widened via stepping the building back for open space.
That was very helpful. Thank you. I feel like I've asked a question in a previous project where if there is a setback requirement, can the developer, can the applicant build a sidewalk, use part of that step back to build a sidewalk? And I thought I remembered that the setback is for landscaping and open space. And so they can't actually put sidewalk in that setback. Are you saying they can if we as planning commission or the city allow them to?
Yeah, it really depends on the site plan design as well as the zone. In this
Okay.
zone, it does require that open space. If the project were to set the building back and not provide a 0 setback, as it would require, it does require open space or landscaping. Albeit, open space can function, in theory, as usable, walkable area. It just would depend on how the site plan is designed.
I get it. Okay. Thank you.
Through the chair, if I could just add one clarification. So the pedestrian master plan is considered a set of guidelines, whereas the zoning code, the build to lot line is a requirement and a development standard.
Through the chair, I did have one other quick question. Thank you. I think, Rendell, in the report, you noted that there's 2 different classifications of bicycle routes on 4th and 5th in Claremont and Delaware. Are they going to be able to install them?
So it would really depend on a few factors. One is, so the bicycle master plan doesn't necessarily require projects to physically construct all improvements along frontages. What would happen, it would become a little bit piecemealed if projects were required on a frontage by frontage basis to build improvements. That said, though, if I'm not mistaken, the project is required a Class 3 bicycle boulevard, which is pavement markings along South Claremont. I believe those markings do exist, so the applicant would be required to replace that through conditions of approval. That doesn't require any physical construction other than pavement markings. Along East 5th Avenue, it's a bit of a different case in that it would require a bit more design analysis because it requires a buffered, not a physically separated lane, but a striped bike lane, so Class 2.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Nugent, do you have any questions at this time?
Yes, through the chair. Some of them have already been covered. Since Commissioner Patel had asked the questions I was having about the sidewalks, the one thing I wanted to follow up on in that vein was when the city's zoning code setback line conflicts with the pedestrian master plan, is there any way for the city to allow or require the 16-foot sidewalks? Or is that turned into a negotiation? How does that work?
So through the chair, I think as the planning manager noted, the pedestrian master plan are guidelines versus the zoning code, which are standards. So I think what the zoning code would say is that the code itself supersedes those requirements. That said, the commission can provide commentary and recommend, the widening of the sidewalks via the PED plan, but I don't believe that we could require it. So I think it would be a bit more of a negotiation.
Okay. Would that conflict with the build to line then require like a council approval, or is that just something that can be approved through, say, calling it a provision of open space? How does that kind of work?
I think it'd be more the latter, that we could approve it provided the greater setback is for the provision of landscape / open space.
Okay. Thank you. The other question, the packet mentioned that this project may or would likely require city council approval. What is it about the project that would require that?
The city council action is required for projects that are over 55 feet in building height. And so the code requires that if there's one entitlement that requires council action, the whole project is considered by the council, as well as the fact that staff would anticipate an EIR being required. So that would also elevate it to the city council action.
Okay, thank you. What's triggering the EIR for this specifically? Or is that not something that's really narrowly defined?
We'd still have to scope the EIR, but staff would anticipate that removal of the historic resource is a substantial impact. And so that would require a really thorough environmental analysis through an EIR.
Okay, thank you. This is a question perhaps for the applicant. Since you mentioned on Delaware Street, you were looking to expand the sidewalks to approximately 13 feet. Are you planning to add street trees along Delaware in that change?
I believe there are street trees on Delaware. So there's street trees on all four frontages. The sidewalk on Delaware is going to be around 13 feet, but the sidewalk on all three other frontages will be an average of 16 feet. So it's just on Delaware where we're pinched.
Okay. But there is plans for street trees on Delaware?
On all four frontages, yes, including Delaware.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Thank you. Those are all the questions I had.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Nugent. So I have a few questions also. Let's see. So we talked about concessions, but there's the waivers. I noticed there was a waiver, it came up on screen, about ramp slope. So can you tell me what that would go from and to?
Sure. So through the chair, the waiver request would be to increase the slope. The code limits ramp slopes to 18%. The applicant's requesting a higher slope of 19.8%. So that would reduce the overall horizontal footprint of the ramp. Garage ramp.
The garage ramp, obviously not an accessibility ramp, I guess. Okay, thanks. Let me see, I have a few random questions. Related to that, I guess, is I'm looking at the data sheet and I'm wondering if you could clarify the open space and there's a waiver for part of it. So I'm wondering if you can just sort of walk us through that a little bit, because commercial's over, residential's under, and what part of that is the waiver?
Sure.
And also, it wasn't clear to me where all of that was. Like, where's the commercial?
Sure. So through the chair, this zone requires open space for both commercial uses, for the commercial component as well as the residential component. So they are at different ratios. The applicant does meet the commercial open space requirement, which is 1% of the commercial floor area, which is just over 1,400 square feet. So the plans propose about 7,000 square feet. That's located along there are a few locations in which the open space is provided, which is on the balcony levels as well as the ground floor. Second, related to the residential open space, it's on a per unit basis, and it also allows a bit of flexibility in that an applicant could meet the open space requirement by private balconies or private open space, or excuse me, through shared, like, common open space. So the applicant proposes a combination of the two. The code requires 80 square feet per unit. However, the applicant is proposing a waiver that reduces that to 57 square feet. So the waiver is specific to the private open space requirement for residential uses.
And so then some of the units don't have that private 57 square foot. And so they would then have access, well, everybody would have access to the common, and that's those similar kind of balconies at the upper level. I mean, there's not anything at the street level, obviously, for the residential. Okay. And so the fact that, so the 6840 number for common space, and they're only providing 3698, how does that work? What is that part of the waiver that is being requested?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, it is related in that the code says you can provide common open space at a rate of 1.5 times the private open space requirement. And so by reducing through a waiver the private open space requirement, that also results in a reduction in the amount of common open space you're required.
Okay. The other, let's see, what other question? I was wondering, I know the answer to this, but I was looking into the Japanese American Community Center building, the little house, and I, read that it dates back to the 1850s. I mean, the city wasn't even founded until, the city was founded at that time, like 1854, I think I read. So, I mean, the building dates back to before we were even a city. So I really, kind of like that little building. I was wondering, is there any talk of or consideration for that building to be moved? I mean, it's been done before. I don't know that it's necessarily, it's a simple little building probably to move.
Yeah, through the chair, maybe if you could clarify, to being moved on the same site or relocated to a different?
Relocated to a different site.
Yeah, so I think through the chair, one thing that is important in this project is that it would likely require an EIR. And so in an EIR preparation, there would be alternatives that would be considered. So I don't know, maybe that could be possibly something that the city could scope is the preservation of the building, but a relocation of it.
Yeah. Something to consider, I think. I think that's it on my questions. Let me just double check. Oh, I know. The other question, I guess, was, are there any, it seems like we've kind of gotten away from this in recent projects, talking about, or sometimes we get away from it. Are there any sustainability features that should be, that are being considered, that should be talked about over and above Cal Green, part of the CBC, which is part of the CBC? Is there anything in particular, like, is it a LEED building? Is that being considered? Okay, great.
And through the chair, one thing I would just add before the applicant speaks on that topic is the city does have adopted REACH codes, which go above and beyond Cal Green, and so they are actually adopted to be revised beginning January 1, so the project would be subject to those requirements. But the applicant could speak on the LEED certification.
So all of our buildings that we built in the downtown are well beyond the city's requirements for sustainability and even beyond the REACH codes that are, coming through. But yeah, so all the buildings are built to a LEED Silver equivalent, and then it's really up to the tenants that occupy the buildings with the TI to know whether we can get to a higher LEED level, like a LEED Gold or a LEED Platinum, because most of that's done with the tenant improvements, not the shell. But the multifamily and the building will all be a LEED Silver equivalent, and then it's just, do we want to pay?
Equivalent meaning you won't go for certification.
We just decide whether or not we want to pay the money to get the plaque. Yeah, and so typically in the buildings we've done so far, we haven't elected to pay the money, but we have the same point card, same consultant certifies the building as LEED Silver. We just don't pay the LEED organization for the plaque. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's, of course, there's all the TDM measures and all the other stuff that's not required that we do with all of our projects.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Through the chair, could I ask a couple of other questions, please? So Rendell, in the waivers, can you briefly describe waiver number 3 and 4?
Sure. So through the chair, waiver 3 is an increase in maximum bulk requirements. Maximum bulk applies when a building is over 55 feet. And so it's similar to in R1 zoning standards, like a daylight plane, basically limit on the massing. So if the project were to comply with the max bulk provisions, it would require much greater step backs toward the upper floors. And so the waiver, in the way that the applicant has framed it, is that applying the bulk provisions would result in a reduction of units. The fourth
So
waiver.
the street wall essentially is meaning stepping back?
The
How does
two
that
are.
term, I don't understand how that term applies.
Yeah, so I should step back a bit. So the street wall area is actually the one that's similar to the daylight plane, which requires step backs. Basically limits the building envelope, meaning like the three-dimensional shape of the building, basically stepping back in that the building has to shrink toward the upper floors.
Okay.
And so that results in a loss of 36 units. I should go back to maximum bulk, which is different in that projects that are over 55 feet have to have a maximum diagonal dimension on the upper floors. And so similarly, to comply with that, the project would lose units.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, any other clarifying questions from commissioners? No? Okay, at this time then, we can go ahead and take public comments on the project. So Ashley, do we have any speakers tonight?
Yes, Chair Williams, right now we have 3 in-person speakers and we have 2 over Zoom, but I'm just going to give it a minute for the Zoom attendees.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I'm just going to give it a minute for people to raise their hands on Zoom.
Oh, okay. So, okay, well, we can go ahead and get started with, we said we do in-person first, right? And I think, I guess 3 minutes per person is fine.
Chair Williams, our first speaker is Kenneth Doe. Kenneth, you can come up to the microphone.
Good evening. My name is Kenneth Doe. I'm with the Carpenters Union, Local 217, located in San Mateo County. Tonight I want to speak to you on the 6-story mixed-use project at 500 East 4th Avenue. Project of this size and scope should have labor standard attached to them. Labor standard would ensure contractors pay fair wages and use experienced and well-trained workers. This leads to higher quality workmanship, meeting building standard, and completing the project quickly. With the livable wage with medical and retirement benefits that allows workers and their families to live in the community they work in, this also means those wages will be reinvested back into the local community and help the local government and schools. We would love to have a real and valuable meeting with each and every one of you to answer questions you might have about what labor standard is and what labor standard should look like. And in closing, I just want to ask you how, as a board, can better protect and guard the working class women and men of our beautiful and diverse city of San Mateo. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Chair Williams, our next speaker is Naomi Tur. Naomi, you can come up to the microphone.
Hi, welcome.
Hello. My name's Naomi, and I'm here to represent the voices of my neighbors and families in the central neighborhood. I live on Fifth Ave and El Dorado. Any development or improvement to Block 20 should consider if there are benefits to the neighbors. We already live in a vibrant small town, walking distance to a bustling downtown with restaurants, grocery stores, exercise facilities, childcare, all mostly two-story in downtown San Mateo, and there's a magic to that. And there's a reason that some of us have moved from San Francisco to San Mateo. Tonight, I am happy to hear that the applicant is considering beautiful improvements to Block 20, street trees, Spanish architecture, pedestrian pathways, and safe bike lanes. So I'm happy to hear that they are considering the input of the community. However, our neighbors are unanimously against the extreme 6-story Block 20 height. The height adds no benefit to us. A 6-story structure next to our 1-story bungalows and our 1 to 2-story small businesses destroys our neighborhood and takes away the magic of San Mateo. A 6-story structure will add more traffic problems in our small town. We don't need more commuters. We don't need more residents. We don't need more cars. We actually need less. 3 years ago, because we hadn't fully implemented all traffic calming measures in our neighborhood, I was on a walk with my son, and we were only 1 block from our home, and as we were crossing the road, a car ran over my son fully. The only reason he's alive is because he was tiny. I thought he was dead at that moment, and it was very traumatic. He took a while to heal his fractures, but he's fine now. Since then, we have received some solutions to traffic calming, but it's not enough on Fifth Ave. I feel that it's still Band-Aid. You know, there's a small sign that says no trucks, and the trucks go by. And we do think that any development should improve traffic in our neighborhood, and so we do request speed humps on Fifth Ave in the neighborhood so that the families can be safe, and also the kids, the 3-year-old kids who are crossing the street to Safari Kid can also be safe. We were disappointed that the Planning Commission approved, without a lot of the neighbors' consent, the 6- and 7-story massive Kiku crossing structure that will add even more traffic problems to our neighborhood. And so now that we have the chance to think again, is the time to think about the welfare of the people who currently live here. And I propose that on Block 20, we think about a, let's see, I know I'm
Sorry,
out of
you're
time.
out of time.
Okay, a 2- or 3-story mixed-use building or townhome, and no more than 3 stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Chair Williams, our next speaker is Lori Watanuki. Lori can come up to the microphone.
Yes,
Lori, you can come up to the microphone, yeah.
Lori.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Lori Watanuki, here to comment on Block 20. We do like the Mediterranean architecture. It's a big improvement over previous projects. We would like to see the height lowered on the Fifth Avenue and Delaware side and improve the Fifth Avenue facade, since this is the path to the downtown Central Park. We'd like to preserve the 2 heritage sycamore trees and add more sycamore trees along Fifth Avenue. As Naomi Therese just mentioned, she'd like to see, and we would like to see, an alternative plan of townhomes, which might be a better fit for this location along Fifth Avenue and Delaware Street. Also, ground floor retail with a coffee shop or a small preschool to replace the Safari Kids, or a community room for community use. There are mixed feelings about the project because of its massive size and height. I want to state that Michael Fields has been a good neighbor and a good friend to our neighborhood, and has helped Sunnybury School with improvements for their playground and with traffic monitoring on 4th Avenue. But our concerns are the traffic and the parking impacts and inadequate parking for the project. There will be 10 two-bedroom units and 35 one-bedroom units, but there are only going to be 43 parking spaces. We would like to see the construction traffic and the regular traffic take South Claremont to 9th, to El Camino to 92, and use the state highways versus the neighborhood streets. We have over 850,000 square feet of new office in the downtown. We'd like to see the office portion reduced to address the 75-foot height, if that could be done. We need an EIR, comprehensive, cumulative traffic and parking study for all the projects in the downtown. And we need an analysis of the cumulative construction impacts. We have a lot of projects in the queue, probably close to 18 projects. And we are concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Chair Williams, our next speaker is Olya over Zoom. Olya, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So first of all, my name is Olya. I have been living in San Mateo for 12 years. And I have to say that I love the idea of keeping the Japanese Center as a part of the San Mateo history. I think it's a fabulous idea. It's a great building. And let's just move it to the corner of the site. Block 21 will only win from being so close to a museum. I think it's a great idea. So on a separate subject, I have attended the neighborhood meeting on November 3rd. And I was the one who brought up that we should increase setbacks and provide more street trees on the side of Delaware. And as I recall, Mike, you agreed with me and you said that you will add trees. I would say we need at least 20 feet setback on Delaware. It's a very dangerous street, it's a busy street, and without protection of the trees and a large setback, pedestrian safety will be at risk. Just a couple days ago, I witnessed an accident in front of my house. A guy was hit by a moving car. I don't know if he survived. When I saw him, he looked pretty kind of motionless to me. So very, very sad and emotionally disturbing moment for me. And I'm glad that Mike is promising to add trees today again, but I'm surprised that they're not present in the current rendering. Mike, how many trees will you add on the side of Delaware? Seems fair that it should be the same number as on other sides of the building. And also going back to November 3rd meeting, I mentioned that Windy Hill does not keep their promises to the neighbors. That's my big concern. And Mike asked me for the example, and unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties, I didn't hear his question. I apologize for that, and I would like to address it now, because I was referring to his promise to build a bike lane on Block 21, which was forgotten and conveniently explained that the developer doesn't have to do it. It's only if he wishes to do it. So I hope this will not happen with this current project. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you for your comments. Do we have any other public speakers?
Yes, we have 2 more over Zoom.
Great.
Our next speaker is George. George, you can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, hello. I also have a comment that references that neighborhood meeting from November 3rd. There was a question that was asked that for some reason didn't make it into the neighborhood meeting notes. But the question that was asked was, how is the density bonus calculated and who makes the calculation? And the answer, kind of a quick answer, but it deserves a longer answer, was that from Rendell was that it's the developer that makes the calculation and they eyeball it. So what I'd like to request is that when this density bonus calculation is made, and the city audits it or whatever it does with it, please post all of the calculations in their full transparency on the city project website for this project and for all projects going forward. It shouldn't be something that kind of gets eyeballed and then everybody says, oh, that's good. There was also actually another question, and Mr. Field answered it saying that he would build all residential on this property if he could, but state law prevented him. I'd like to have more detail on what state law it is that prevents him from building all retail on this site. There was a meeting, planning commission meeting on Block 21, where Commissioner Wiggins lamented that there was no street activation, there was no ground floor retail happening on Block 21, and how going forward, it's something that we really have to do differently. And this is now the fifth project that Windy Hill is doing in adjacent blocks. In fact, I guess they're taking up about 25 to 30% of the buildable space in the downtown area that sits east of the railroad tracks. So, I think you should not let this building go forward without the entire ground floor being retail and having commercial uses or community uses, period. It makes no sense to keep building what they've been building. In that vein also, we've lost actually some green space. This isn't an area that has a lot of park space, but the lawn over at the Kentucky Fried Chicken and their little garden area and the lawn over Taco Bell, that was green space. Now we don't have any. Somebody suggested that maybe we move the Japanese Center to the corner of the property. Mike Field said, well, we have to change the look on Claremont to make it work better with the neighborhood. How about a Japanese American memorial garden running along Claremont Street with the Japanese Center there, the old building, which by the way, I understand is the oldest standing structure in the city of San Mateo, the oldest. Why don't we do that along Claremont? It'll be beautiful for the neighborhood. It'll actually enhance how the building looks. It's kind of getting cookie cutter at this point. The last comment, trees. When they did 405 East 4th Avenue, 4 trees. There are 8 trees alone on Taco Bell. There are 50
George,
trees.
Your time is up.
Oh, okay. Well, trees.
All right. Thanks for your comments. All right. The next speaker, please.
Chair Williams, our last speaker over Zoom is Linda Simonson. Linda, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hello. Yes, so I agree with Lori in that we need to look at the overall impact of all of the construction, the building, the usage type of all of the different buildings that are going up. I think we need an overall discussion of that. A whole meeting should be look at scoping that all out and what's the overall impact and the usage. I do think that's important. Similar to my concerns on the last project we met about, I am concerned about the parking. And I think the size of the building is huge. It is out of scale with the neighborhood that it abuts. I am concerned about it. It does seem as though the chains left the station on that. We may not be able to change that. But if we do, I think in a lot of these projects, there is a real underestimation of the potential need for parking. Even though it's near Caltrain basically goes such limited places. I live in the neighborhood. I never would use Caltrain for any local. There's no place you can go to do errands on Caltrain. Perhaps Samtrams, but that's a schlep. That's almost a mile away. So the fact that it's near a transit station does not mean that people that reside there wouldn't need cars to get to school, to get to stores. I am concerned that now that it's not required because of the new laws coming in 2023, I think the city really needs to look at if these new buildings do not have adequate parking for the residents and the people that work there. They need to consider what are options to add additional parking so that the neighboring communities, the neighboring residents are not impacted with people not having adequate parking. Or even looking, in addition, also looking at like some electric shuttles, something to get people around the city. both Samtrans and Caltrain only go north-south. They don't go to schools, they don't go to stores. We are not like it's New York City here. So I do think that really is an issue for the residents and the workers as well as the neighboring community. My last comment would be, and I'm, haven't been following this a lot the last couple of years. I had other things going on, but how this comes about that how this happens, a developer has an idea, they buy the building believing they're going to have a certain thing, a certain type of building, and then it seems like we just need to approve them because they've already bought it and not really analyzing what does our community need. And one of the commissioners last session said that I would participate in, said, nobody ever talks about an office crisis. We talk about housing crisis. Housing is what's needed in our community across the income ranges and not more office space. So that would be my final comment.
All right, thank you for your comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So are there any other hands being raised?
Chair Williams, there are no more speakers.
Okay, great. So at this time, I wanted to see if the applicant would like to, I think we typically provide the option for a rebuttal time. I don't know how much time. Let me see what it says. 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 5 minutes.
So if you're interested in responding any further to any of the comments we've heard, you can utilize up to 5 minutes.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you so much. So a few things to mention. I'll start with the failed promise because that's near and dear to my heart. But, as you might recall, Block 21, we paid close to $7 million of fees to the city, and $1.5 million of those are traffic impact fees. At that time, the traffic impact fees were not able to be applied to bicycle lanes. That has changed. And with Block 20, the fees that we pay in connection with traffic impact will be available to the city to provide bike lanes in this entire area. So, and those impact fees will be similar to what they were on Block 21. So no failed promises from Windy Hill. I just want to make sure and catch that. Trees, so we're going to look, what was just brought up is preserving 2 trees. We'll certainly look at that with the arborist. We will install as many trees as the downtown plan will let us install. So you tell me how many you want, and I'll put them there. We are completely aligned in putting large trees, getting them to grow quickly. There is benefit to all the faster we have large, mature trees around these buildings. It improves everything from the aesthetic to the pedestrian environment, et cetera. So we're completely in alignment on that. TDM measures. So one thing to discuss is parking. So yes, as of January, parking isn't required. You will not see this project resubmitted with any less parking than it has right now. So that's not something we're looking to take advantage of here. We are going to build the 2 levels of subterranean parking, and we'll also provide the TDM plans. I cannot emphasize enough that the idea that folks behave the same way today as they did prior regarding vehicular use is just so proven wrong at this point. From every downtown that's analyzed their downtown parking district, we do not need the amount of parking, and we do not want the kind of parking that buildings used to provide, because it does create more vehicular traffic. And so our employees get free train passes, free Samtrans passes. Our residents get free train passes. They use public transit because it's free. And not every building in downtown provides that. It's not required in San Mateo, but all of our buildings, our conditions of approval require that. So that's on the parking front. Let's see. The house. We're doing an EIR. We're going to look at alternatives. I will encourage you, if you would like, to contact the Japanese Cultural Center. Wes would be happy to have you, and go take a look at the house. And it'll give you an idea of what an 1840 house, the kind of condition that it's in. And so that's one of the reasons that the Japanese Cultural Center, to sustain its use for decades to come, needs to relocate. And so we're working on that. And the house specifically, the specific architecture of the house is not, now again, we're gonna get the EIR, we're gonna get a historic report and all that, but aesthetically, it's not a particularly unique architecture. Okay, what else am I missing? I have a minute 30 left. We can't build any more residential on the site, as I think you know. So to answer that question, the city of San Mateo has a certain density unit per acre. We can build to that maximum density unit, and that's it. And so, for example, the fish market site, which is another project that we have been looking at, you're potentially going to see that resubmitted with significantly less units than we initially submitted, because we simply cannot find a way under this current framework to get any more units there than 261 units. So that's the world we're living in. And so that's what we, even with state density bonus, that's our maximum. Height. So again, we're dealing with a lot of constraints, but the main one is when we provide the residential units on top of the office. Again, we can't get more residential. It's not possible. And the site would never economically function without the office. You could never afford to build subterranean parking without the office. So we're doing the best we can, and some developers are willing to build residential with the office, some aren't. We're obviously willing to do it, but the density is required in order to make it work. So.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, could I keep Mike up at the podium for 1 minute, please?
You know I love to hear myself talk, so.
Thank you. So there was one question of unionized labor.
Yes. So as you can see, I got a fist bump on his way out. So roughly 85% of our project cost is union labor. The carpenters union will build this project. We do not sign labor agreements because it inhibits our ability to create a competitive bidding environment. But 85% of the project will be union labor. So the MEP&F, the vast majority will be union labor.
And with the solar component, how aggressive are you going to be specifically for the rental units with supplying solar, or will you be?
So that's a good question. I need to look into that and understand. I know we have a solar requirement that we will certainly meet, but I'll have to look at as we get into the mechanical design. Obviously, it behooves us to have, we're already putting the infrastructure in place for solar. So at that point, it behooves you to have as much as you possibly can because you've already put in, the switchgear and everything else. But I would have to get our mechanical design more further ahead to understand how much more roof area we have to deal with in and above what's required. But certainly we will have some amount of solar. I just don't know how much yet.
So are you guys currently looking at any gray water reuse on site, or are we not going down that route yet?
So our buildings in Redwood City have gray water, right? Or excuse me, recycled water.
For the recycled water for
landscape. And are they bathrooms too, or just landscape in Redwood City? So anyway, there's a citywide system that we tie the building into. Yes. So what we can do here is if that system ever comes into play in San Mateo, we can agree that the building will be part of that, what's the word I'm looking for, rollout. So if San Mateo ever commits to that kind of a system, obviously we'll have our own, all the C3 filtration, all of our, stormwater on site gets filtered, all that stuff, which is standard. But as far as gray water, it really has to be done on a citywide basis, and then you get buildings to kind of elect in, because all the pipe has to be laid in the public right-of-way to get it to work.
Yeah, I'm sure it's difficult doing building per building. I know it can be, but it's exceedingly costly. I had not mentioned that I have gone to the site and I have spoken with the applicant prior to tonight's meeting. You said you can't build any more housing on that site. The only way to build additional housing on that site if it was 100% affordable.
That's correct. That's correct. Thank you for correcting me. And that's what, obviously occurred next door, which
Right.
I know, some people have their opinions about it, but at the end of the day, that's an incredibly successful housing project. One of very few large-scale affordable housing projects built in San Mateo County. So for what it's worth, it's providing homes for a lot of people that can't afford to live here.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Through the chair, is it okay if I ask one more question of the applicant?
Is that all right?
Okay, thank you.
We have all night.
I wanted to ask about the parking. So you've got, I just had this written down, 43 off-street parking spaces for the 86 residential units. So every unit gets half a parking space. I was curious how because I believe that is the old mandated ratio per the state density bonus,
That's
which
right.
will now go away in January. How at your other projects have you allocated that residential parking? Is it open, first come, first serve? Is it assigned to specific units? How does that work?
So as part of our TDM measures, we do unbundled parking on the residential, so the residents will actually have to pay. It's not meant necessarily to be punitive, but it's meant to encourage, again, with your free transportation passes, et cetera, do you really want this parking stall? And so they'll have to pay a monthly rent in order to secure one of those parking stalls. San Mateo, as you know, is evolving its parking plans, and so there's some other things that we can potentially look at. One of the things we've done in other municipalities is shared parking between the residential and office. We found that to be super successful because during the day, the office can use the resident stalls, and at night, and so it really eliminates any overflow potential. But again, heretofore, that hasn't been something we've been able to do in San Mateo because of the current codes. But I know that the city is looking at making some changes there. And so those are certain
Yeah,
things
that has come up before, yeah.
Yeah, that if that change is made and the project could then adapt to that, that would be awesome. So that's, it's unbundled and they have to pay.
Okay, great, thank you.
At this point.
Right.
If we ever did shared, then I think we could be more flexible because there would be a lot of parking sitting there unused. Keep in mind, on the other projects, we did do the shared public parking, which, now with the Fifth Street garage going in, it's probably unnecessary.
Right.
Oh, excuse me, did you say elsewhere if the shared parking was super positive or not?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
super positive. So right now in San Mateo, the residential parking has to be gated and secured. In other cities, they let you share. So that extra 40 stalls during the day becomes office parking, and at night, the 180 or however many office parking stalls there are become available to the residents. So it eliminates any potential issue. Although I will tell you that even with the parking counts the way they are, the studies are showing that there will not be issues here.
So the shared means somebody wouldn't be paying rent for that parking space?
Yeah, so right now, because, unbundled parking is also part of the TDM program. So I'd have to talk to Lisa, who knows a lot more about this than I do, but we do get TDM points for having the parking unbundled. But the idea of doing the shared parking, in my view, is it's logical, right? Why are we not letting residents park in office parking during the night? And why are we not letting office folks rent or park in residential stalls during the day when they're available? And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, unless you have to work from home one day because your kid's sick,
Yeah.
and then you have to take your kid to the doctor, and then come back, and there's no parking, and you've got to park a few blocks away in the neighborhood.
yeah.
I mean, there's logistics that we're not thinking of, I guess, but.
And typically that might be true of some of the stalls, but not all. But yes, right now, the way it works in San Mateo, it's separate from the commercial, and we do unbundled parking, and they have to rent a space. So that's how.
We are using shared parking in some of the buildings for nighttime parking. aren't
That's
we?
correct.
Yes.
Yeah, with the general public.
Right.
Yeah.
This
But
came
not
up in the
between-
Dragers project. It was the same issue with the residential parking and the gating.
Yeah, but not between uses, just between the general public. Anything else on that?
Thank you.
No, I think that's it. Okay. Any other questions from Commissioner Nugent as well? Just since we've
No,
been sort of
I don't
meeting-
have any more.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So at this time, I think we can open it up to the Planning Commission deliberation. And is there any, either one of you would like to go first? You never want to go first.
Well, I lean on some of the other professionals here for their input on the architectural styles more often than not.
I understand that.
I can start, but
great.
I might change my whole spiel after I hear you.
Oh, okay.
I'm really happy that Windy Hill has programmed this project differently from the other ones in the area. Thank you. I think it's appropriate. I generally like the feel of it. I like the archways on the second floor. I think they're attractive. I think fixing that one corner you were talking about would make a lot of sense. I would like to see a small market on that corner possibly. I think it would be a great welcoming to the neighborhood, the adjacent neighborhood. I think it's going to be really difficult to see what happens around that whole area going forward also. I know, Mike, you said this might be your last hurrah, but I think Block 21 was your previous last hurrah. So, or it was the best one ever, I forget. I don't have any hair left. I think nodding to the neighborhood in the best way that you can. I do have to feel or acknowledge the neighbors' concerns with this height of a building. It does not transition well. There aren't other buildings right there that size, so it's not going to transition well. There's going to be a conflict. And I think the best way for you to do that is to take the input from the public. As you said, you had some really good input, and you can make some adjustments here. I agree, more trees the better, more solar the better. Sidewalks, obviously, you're somewhat tied into the constraints to make this happen. I also feel similar as one of the public speakers spoke of seeing the proof of why you can't reduce some things financially, but I know that that is not normally shared in that detail. It's understandable. I see no problems with the ramp concession. You know, it's got to be. You get a bunch of extra spaces. The bulk is what it is. Again, it's based on the financial component. It is a drastic change from what is there, but what is there is not usable any longer. So good for you. Thank you for making the effort. I'd like to see some more articulation on the upper window floors, the windows on the upper, step them back some. I do like the small patios. I think it's always a nice benefit for the residents. I know you have some exterior patios. I don't know if that's the commercial side on the fourth or fifth floor. Is that residential? Oh, it's both. Okay, good. I was a little surprised that you've broken up you've got almost 7,000 square feet on 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, whatever they were. To me, it would have made a little bit more sense, and I would have think it might have been a little bit more economically feasible if you combine those to one of those floors. And I kind of looked at how that might work, but I don't know why you would break it up. You're adding more toilets, you're adding more exits, so on and so forth. It didn't seem like the most economical way to keep that space, but maybe there's a reason why you've scheduled it that way. I like the color. Of course, I like green walls, and I think you've alluded to you will use them somewhere in some of your projects. But generally overall, I like it. Again, I do feel for the neighbors. If I was in a one-story residential across the street, I would find this imposing, obviously. It's not an easy thing to have that drastic of a change, 60 or 100 feet from your front door. But I also think the project overall, through time, will be a benefit for the neighborhood. So thank you.
All right, Commissioner Patel, would you like to go ahead?
I think I'm up. All right. So, talking about design, no worries. I think there is very little in this city that there is universal agreement over. We are a very divided city, particularly right now. And so if you ask 10 different people, you're likely to get 10 different opinions. And I include myself in that category. I hear a lot from public commenters that concerns about mass. We hear a lot of commenters say, I don't like big, massive buildings. This is too bulky. This is too big. And oftentimes when commenters through letters submit examples of buildings that they like, they point to pre-war buildings that are big and massive. The San Mateo Heritage Alliance on their website as their banner image has the Benjamin Franklin Hotel downtown, which is a 9-story concrete block that is surrounded by 2-story commercial. And yet people really like it. So I often try to figure out what is it exactly about the bulk and the mass that people are opposed to. That we had a few projects ago where there was a resident who sent in a letter with 6 or 7 different examples of buildings that they liked. And they were all very large, very blocky buildings. And so I think it's something about the design of the building that appeals in that scenario, something about designing the ground floor at the human scale. My favorite example is Haussmann buildings in Paris, right? I think they're kind of held as the pinnacle example of medium density 6-story buildings. If you look at them, there's no step backs, there's no articulated facades. They are very even, but they're beautiful. And the detailing on every story is different. That's kind of what breaks it up from looking like a giant mass. And of course, like the architectural detail of the railings and the cornices and all of that stuff. I am not going to do these comments as much justice as my fellow commissioners, so I won't go into too much details. I know from previous meetings that Commissioner Nugent's going to do a much better job of this kind of feedback. But what I would say is that when it comes to the massing, I personally am not a fan of overly articulated facades. And I think when we ask people in the community to share examples of buildings they like, they will give us big, massive buildings, but it's something about the level of attention to detail in the design that appeals. And so I think there's something there in that. I would have you go look at, for example, the Haussmann buildings, and I can give you a couple other examples to look at in thinking about how to design a large building. So I mentioned like the overly articulated facades. If you look at the north elevation, the East 4th Avenue elevation, that was the one that stuck out to me as having a lot going on. The other 3 elevations, I don't know if we have the presentation and we can pull it up and we can look at it. Yeah, I think it might be the one that's not on here. Yeah, it's this one. This is the one, this elevation where it feels like there's like 2 corner columns and then the middle dips down a bit. And when you actually look at the one that's in the packet where it's like the flat on elevation, it's just a lot, I personally think, to digest. When I look at the other 3 elevations, it feels a little bit more calm and even to me. Yeah, so that's just my personal preference. I don't like the overly articulated facades. I prefer the more classic pre-war buildings, Benjamin Franklin Hotel, Haussmann buildings in Paris, something with nice detailing and more even facades. I realize that our code has step back requirements, and so we can't achieve the pre-war look anymore because of how our current codes are written. So I say that knowing that. Philosophically, like I said, this is not a city that unanimously agrees on anything. Philosophically, I hear 2 camps when it comes to look and feel downtown. I hear the camp that says we should have a unified look and feel. We should have a San Mateo brand, for lack of better word, downtown. And I hear people in that camp point to Redwood City. When you go to Redwood City and you go to their downtown, all of the buildings have a very similar look and feel. You know you're in Redwood City, and everything matches and it looks nice. The other camp I hear is the San Mateo has a broad set of architectural styles, and we should celebrate that. So we should have a little bit of everything in our downtown. We should have some Spanish Revival, and we should have some contemporary, and we should have some craftsmen. And I don't know that there's a right answer, right? I feel like I hear both perspectives. When I looked at that comparison of Kiku Crossing, Block 21, and Block 20, those three buildings in such close adjacency all look very different. To me, they don't look like they match. They don't look like they fit in together. I think you could do a couple things. You could make Block 20 look more like Block 21, which looks like the other make it feel like it has a more of a fit to the other Windy Hill buildings, and to try to establish a little bit more of that cohesive look and feel in the, what is it called, downtown support area. The other thing you could do is you could push this one a little bit farther away, try to make the three of them completely distinct. I think it's something about the color that makes this one feel like it doesn't fit in as well with Kiku Crossing and Block 21. I think maybe if you pushed away from sort of the sand and the taupe that to me seems a little bit more southwestern, and you went more into the classic Spanish Revival, like whites and ivories, you could get a little bit closer to the color scheme of Block 21, maybe, and like maybe they would fit a little bit better together. I'm not an architect, so I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas. I would not call the current design of Block 20 Mediterranean. I would call it Mediterranean inspired, maybe. And so if I could give you some examples of other projects to look at to bring this more into the Spanish Revival style, which is what you see in the central neighborhood. Some examples I would point you to are Casa Baywood at 212 South El Camino in San Mateo. That is, can't remember off the top of my head how many stories it is. It's at like maybe 8 or 9, but it's a Spanish Revival apartment condo building. I know we've referenced it in the past. Yeah, that's what we all say. That's the building we love. So you're going to hear us mention that one a lot. Another one you could look at is Firehouse Square, which is 1300 El Camino Real in Belmont. That is another Spanish Revival style building that I think a lot of people reference. We hear that one in public comment a lot. Whenever we have Spanish or Mediterranean style buildings come up, we hear people mention Firehouse Square. And then the last one, which I'm certain based on past projects that Commissioner Nugent is going to bring up, is 581 Ramona Street in Palo Alto. That one, also beautiful, and also, I think 6 or 7 stories, and has ground floor retail. And what you'll see of all of those projects, I think Firehouse Square is modern. It's, I think it opened last year, so you can see how they've had to deal with the step back requirements in Belmont. Casa Baywood and 581 Ramona Street were obviously built a long, long time ago, and so they're more of like the even facade. But they're both great examples of how you could do a Spanish Revival style big building and fit in with the Spanish style in the central neighborhood. In terms of how to program the ground floor, I agree that it would be great to have retail on this, at least some of this ground floor plane. I mentioned before that I live in this neighborhood, but full disclosure, outside of the notification zone, so I'm a little bit farther away. And I can confirm that Fifth Avenue is the main pedestrian path to downtown. And the spot where Safari Kid is right now, I feel like would be perfect for a corner store, bodega type market. Something really small where you can go if you're out of a gallon of milk, you can just walk down there and not have to go either to 7-Eleven or the 9th Ave Deli, which are the other two close stores. So a little corner store could be a huge benefit for the neighborhood. Could also be good for employees if they want to grab a coffee or something on the way in every morning. And I think as much as it would be possible, any other retail you could program on the ground floor would be great for the neighborhood. I think that's all of the comments I have for now. I think to Commissioner Ebnetter's comments about wanting to be mindful of the concerns of the neighborhood, I hear them. I also share concerns, particularly with respect to traffic and safety. It's my hope that we can eventually get that bicycle master plan put in on Fifth Avenue, because the biggest thing that cuts down on reckless vehicle behavior is narrowing of the streets. And I think if we can get those bike lanes in, we can narrow the roadway and we can get cars to behave more responsibly. Also pedestrian bulb outs. I could go on forever about this topic. But just to echo that, there are a multitude of opinions, and I think we see the same data that you see, that behaviors are changing. And I think that when you have a residential project like this, where there are not 2 or 3 parking spots available per unit, you are not going to attract people who have 2 or 3 cars. You are going to attract people who have 1 or no cars. People will match with the living options that best work for them. So yeah, I think it would be great if we as a city could figure out how to do the sharing between the office and the residential, because I think that'll really solve some of those concerns and problems as well. I had one more comment that came up and I can't remember it, so if I can think of it, I'll come back. But I think that was most of my comments. Oh, I know what I was going to do. Go through my usual spiel about how if you look at the projects that are approved in the downtown core and the support vicinity over the past 3 years, we have approved 2,655 new jobs and 447 units of housing. We are already 1,300 plus homes short of what we need to maintain a balanced jobs to housing ratio downtown. Obviously, by creating more office space in 86 residential units, we are not addressing that imbalance. That said, you are building the maximum amount of residential allowed on this site permitted under measure-wise 50 unit per acre limit plus the 50% state density bonus. You're actually 1 unit short. But you're doing almost everything you can given Measure Y. And so you're doing the best you can within the rule book that we have given you. And I think that's just more evidence that we need to figure out how to change the rule book. And I hope that we can do that as part of the general plan process. Those are all my comments.
All right, thank you for your comments. Commissioner Nugent, wherever you are, would you like to go next?
Yes, I'll go next.
Okay, great.
Thank you, staff, for putting this all together. It's the packet was very thorough and helpful, and it allowed me to form a lot of comments. I was able to read all of the public comments and everything that was in the packet, and there was a lot of stuff that resonated with me. I'm going to go through and talk first about proposed uses and then go into building design. I have a number of comments to talk about in both aspects, both categories. But first, I want to talk about proposed units. I want to echo what Commissioner Patel had mentioned about the office space. My preference is for less and a lot less. It's not that I don't think office belongs downtown. It's that we need to find a way to balance the amount of office that's being created with a constant amount of new housing. And that is frankly a general plan problem, because this project appears to be following our existing codes and state level bonuses. You know, it's not the project that's coming forward with something that is incompatible or inconsistent with our general plan. It's the fact that we currently are set up to fail in providing a jobs housing balance as the system is currently created. And so we need to solve that through our local legislative process. Where does that leave this project? I mean, it's not protected by the Housing Accountability Act. It's not something it's something that needs to be approved by the city council. And we have a brand new city council, so we don't know what they're going to vote, how they're going to treat this project. And I think the applicant should be aware of that and cognizant of that. If it was up to me, I would say I'd much rather see all of the number of units that are proposed, but with much less commercial and hopefully some additional activated uses like daycare or commercial retail businesses at the ground level. That to me would be my preference for this site. If I could just wave a wand and create the zoning as I saw fit. That's not the power that we're discussing right now. This is about a project. So I'm going to just say what I would like to see in this project from a proposed use. I see that the number of units is one short of the maximum allowed under a combination of city ordinance and state bonus. I'd like to see that get that one last unit. And I also think we should be seeing more multi-bedroom units. I think it should be closer to 2/3 of the units than what the current mix is. It's unfortunate that we're not getting the multi-bedroom units when that is a significant need as well. It's not to say that we don't need smaller units. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that it would be nice to have a better mix than what's currently shown. The neighborhood serving retail potential to me would be nice, especially along the 4th or 5th Avenue where people are walking from the neighborhoods towards downtown. And I think a childcare space would be fantastic. Not necessarily, obviously, Safari Kids, but childcare is a strong need. And as we have so much office space along these blocks along Delaware, you kind of lose the connection between the existing retail spaces all on Delaware, on the other side of Delaware, on the 101 side of Delaware, where people are less apt to walk from downtown to those spaces. So they get in their cars and they go from one space to another, and it's kind of disconnected. And so having some way that we can kind of funnel people between the B Street and 3rd and 4th Avenue spaces would be an improvement, in my opinion. People walk down 5th Avenue because it's pleasant. And so we want to encourage that to continue and make sure that that stays pleasant. And then one last thing on the proposed uses, I do want to follow closely the relocation of the Japanese American Community Center and make sure that there's a good home for that. The existing building that it's in is very interesting because it is the oldest remaining structure in San Mateo, but it isn't particularly unique as far as like structures go. They're buildings that you see, like in general, it's not like a standout building. It's just of interest because it's the oldest building. That being said, this project or this property or these group of properties would not be eligible for the new state laws like AB 2011 because of the existence of the historical property. And I'm not sure that SB 6 would provide much benefit beyond what's already allowed. And so I don't think new state laws would apply to this. So you're basically working with what the city's codes and state density bonus allows you to use. And so in that sense, I think, again, it'd be nice if we had larger units and less office from a proposed use standpoint. I'm going to go to building design next, and I have a number of things to say about this, and I don't want it to be taken as like a knock on the building design in any way. I think what this means is that there's enough appeal to the building design that we could make it much better with some changes that could be voiced at a planning commission meeting. First, before I get into that, I just wanted to mention something that Commissioner Patel had said. I don't know if I really think of Redwood City as being remarkably consistent architecturally, especially around, say, like the county facilities downtown. That's just me. I think that there are some cities that are more consistent. It's not a knock on Redwood City, but I don't particularly think of it as like a consistent architectural style there. I would, looking at the new projects that are coming online along that area by Windy Hill and there's like, I think a color scheme that is a little bit more cream and ivory for larger portions of the building could help it unify a little bit with those buildings, even if the style is different. The transition to the surrounding uses, especially the lower density residential, is tough. It is a tall building. It is the step backs, I think, help from a pedestrian view, because it does feel like the top 3 floors are perhaps behind the lower 3 floors when you're at a pedestrian level. Kind of fools the eye. But I think again, my preference would be if it was much more, less office and just those 3 levels and maybe a single level of retail or something on the ground level and offices. But given the project as it's proposed, I think having large street trees is absolutely vital. That's going to make a huge impact as far as what the experience is, and can soften quite a bit of the stark transition. I'm going to go into more building design details now. I want to first mention the roof. I generally appreciate the roof design as a Mediterranean-inspired building. I think that we can, I like the roof line, the tile roofing material, the decorative corbels are all quite good, notably on the residential portion of the building. But I want to talk about the windows throughout, especially on the residential floors. I feel the windows are just too contemporary. Their design and placement, to me, are the single biggest distraction from the building design, and they directly make it feel less authentic. I think traditional Mediterranean windows can be seen in most older parts of Spanish and Italian cities in urban multi-story context. And a good contemporary or not hundreds of years old example of a revival take is that whole north block of Ramona Street in Palo Alto between University and Hamilton. And it feels authentic without actually being a complete pulling of, a city from like a downtown block in Madrid. But one of the key aspects of the traditional Mediterranean architecture is the masonry construction. And so the flush windows that are shown betray that. You would generally greatly improve the authenticity of the design just by recessing the windows by a few inches from the main face of the building. And typically traditional style buildings have windows that are vertical rectangles that are separated by amount of wall space that's equal or greater to the width of the rectangular window. And there's a lot of, horizontally shaped windows which feel out of place. Now I'll talk about ways to get around that if you want to have horizontal orientation, but at least in some of the building, vertical rectangular glazed openings are typically composed of just two long panes that are side by side in, say, an Italian city or Madrid in a older Mediterranean style urban building. And they usually can swing open or appear to swing open. And it's sometimes these are further divided by upright rectangular lights that are separated by muntins. So consider that more verticality to the windows. If you must provide wider glazed openings rather than more narrow upright rectangular openings, they should be broken up by mullions that are as wide as and flush with the surrounding trim. The mullions should more or less match the trim and be relatively substantial and not to be mistaken for like a muntin. In my opinion, that is a little bit less authentic for traditional Mediterranean urban buildings, but it could be an acceptable solution, especially if only some of the glazing is this extra wide, like multi window combination. So in this context of wide glazed openings, the windows should look more like upright sash windows in sets of 2 or 3, depending on the width of the glazed openings, and could further be divided by lights separated by muntins. And another alternative is to use like a box bay window or a semi-hexagonal bay windows for wider glazed openings. And then also I just want to mention something about the window trim. I think that the window trim, you don't necessarily need to have window trim in a Mediterranean building, and sometimes that feels more authentic than something that's not quite like what a traditional building would have. If you do have window trim, I think that they should have traditional trim language for Mediterranean architecture. So at least have a sill and an apron. And then, you could even have a frieze and a cornice or crown along the trim top. Would even make it look authentic as well if you want to get a little bit fancier. But if you don't have a window trim, you could do simple lintels or faux lintels above the windows if you want to have a little more texture. I'm going to talk a little bit about layout in relation to windows. And then I'm going to just go and reference some buildings that I think would be good reference points to kind of describe what I'm talking about here. With the corner units and the top 3 floors. So I don't know if you could go to the rendering of the building. Please just like show, yeah, perfect. So these corner units on the top 3 floors where there's windows separated by large space of blank wall space, that feels really weird to me and doesn't seem authentic. I don't really understand why the living spaces in those units are not on the exterior of the building to provide more opportunities for natural light. Because right now there's windowless bathrooms on the exterior walls, and that doesn't make sense to me because, from an exterior perspective, it makes for a planar building face at the most prominent corners of the building. And that's just kind of a vacuum created by the windowless stretch of walls where the bathrooms are. I think if you need to put bathrooms there for some reason, then at least put frosted windows in them or something of equal size so that we don't have such a blank space on those prominent corners. And then I want to talk about the lower 3 floors. So there is a bit of monotony at the lower 3 floors that I would love to see broken up. I think that the design is not bad if it was like a third of the lower floor, but where there's like a break in the facade after, 3 or 4 bays, so like maybe 2/3 or a third of the space, like I would like to see a different motif shown, just because it's just so much of the same thing all the way around the building. And to me, it just feels too repetitive. So the windows down at those levels are also a little bit too contemporary for me. I find that the lower level is a little bit better. For some reason, it just feels a little bit better. But it also is very different from the top level, and it might be nice to have a little bit more consistency between them. So a little bit more authenticity. I think that a good example of 2 or 3 floors of, high amount of light, a high amount of glazing, Mediterranean or Mediterranean adjacent buildings can be seen at 601 3rd Street in San Francisco. I'll say that again, 601 3rd Street in San Francisco. It's a blue and cream building, but it has a lot of glazing. It shows the sash windows with prominent mullions between them, and then some large windows that are divided by a lot of lights. I think that's a good motif that maybe could be seen on portions of the lower levels. And then a fantastic 3-story office building that was built over 100 years ago in the Spanish Mission Revival style is at 550 Elizabeth Street in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I'll say that again. It's 550 Elizabeth Street in Waukesha, Wisconsin. It's a random place, I know, but it's a really good example of it done well, and feels authentic to me. Will also seems to provide quite a bit of glazing in that style. Okay, so those are my building comments. I'm going to go just a couple comments on landscape. I think I read some comments from the public. I don't remember who said it, but a curbside drop-off area would be very helpful for traffic flows. And I also think it would incentivize some reduction in single occupant automobile use when people can be dropped off and it's not blocking traffic and it's not a hassle and it's not blocking future bike lanes. I think having a curbside drop-off area would be beneficial for a project like this. And then also, I just want to emphasize Fifth Avenue is the pedestrian pathway from that neighborhood because it is a very pleasant architectural experience, and especially has a fantastic tree canopy. So the tree canopy around the building is just going to be so important. It makes people feel safer from traffic, and it softens big buildings by quite a bit. And I think that's one universal look that everybody can agree on for San Mateo. It's having a nice tree canopy. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right. Great. Thank you, Commissioner Nugent. So I will go ahead and provide some comments as well. And my notes are a little bit all over the place as usual. I start out with them clear and then I keep adding in as people are speaking, like you said. I will start by saying that there was 2 things that Adam said that were things that I had been wanting to comment on too, which is that I think that the building excuse me, it could benefit from, if I would like to see the same amount of housing and less commercial, which would make it less of a massive building. Hold on one second. Shoot. The other item was the curbside drop-off. I don't know what happened to me all of a sudden. Okay, so I think that the curbside drop-off is a useful way to address, like you said, the fact that there's less residents with cars or people working there with cars. So if there was a way to accommodate a curbside drop-off, I think that would go a long ways towards, you know, some of the traffic congestion and the issues around all the growth there. I also think that if it was to be something like a childcare, you really do need a parking lot or a, you know, more than just a drop-off zone, not necessarily a parking lot, but you need something for those that do need to drive and those that do need to get their child out of a car seat, for instance. You know, maybe it's a neighborhood childcare location, but there, you know, there's probably some people that would drive. So just as there is at Safari Kids probably currently. So for uses, so I'll kind of go through, I guess, a couple of the things on screen and see if I can put my notes into more sense. For uses, I mean, I guess I kind of agree with what everyone else is saying, is that what would be ideal is if it could be an active use, you know, community use, retail use, that kind of thing, and not simply office or, you know, commercial office space. And I think that it's, you know, it's the kind of thing that, you know, you need to maintain that, you know, a certain level of, you know, transparency into the building as you walk along. So creating that kind of active use, whether it's retail or I liked one of the speakers talked about a community, perhaps a community room, even something to that effect. So those would be preferable. And I think that along 5th and 4th are probably the most preferable locations. So with regards to, let's see, what else I'm going to talk about before I get into like specific design things. I do think it's I guess just overall, I do think it's a fairly massive building. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't help but get creative in my mind and think, well, maybe there's a way to, you know, carve out something, you know, whether it be, I liked the idea of the Japanese American community garden, for instance, or, you know, I feel like there's a way that it could transition a lot nicer, a lot more interesting to the adjacent single-family residential neighborhoods. I would like to see them push the envelope a little bit, push the envelope in a little bit, and see if there could be some amenities that would transition it nicely to that neighborhood. I mean, you can tell it's a massive building when you look at the floor plans for the building, and you look at where the residential elevator is and the distance that you would need to walk to come out and around and all the way over to that one, I think it would be Delaware. You know, it's a long walk from the elevator to the farthest unit. So I don't know. I feel like it could be reduced in height a little bit, even if it was just carving a few feet out, but you know, not necessarily losing any of the floors or the housing. So the sidewalks, I liked what I heard about the sidewalk increasing, and I mean, I'm sure it could increase. It just means that you lose some of the office commercial space, and then you have more room for pedestrian along Delaware, I think is what you were talking about, and reduces that imposing mass of the building in the neighborhood. So I think that needs to be pushed a little bit, and of course provides more room for trees. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, when I look at like the adjacent uses, like that little Spanish bungalow that's diagonal across the street, like, you know, somebody made the comment, it's really not very far diagonally across the street to that little one-story bungalow house that's going to be really affected by that. Okay, so in terms of design, I felt like that I don't think it needs any more articulation. It has a lot of articulation. There's a lot going on. I keep looking at my screen because I have one of the images up, and that's the one that I've been referring to and looking at. There's a couple of things in terms of the Mediterranean features. I love the tile roofs, and they do add a little bit of height, but I think, I mean, it's not just a flat roof or this sort of modern element that we've seen on a lot of buildings. It brings to mind a little bit, there's this building that it's not a great building, but I worked right above it on 2nd and Brannan in the city years and years ago. And it's the Delancey Street Foundation, I guess. And I would look down on these terracotta, tile roofs, and it just reminded me of that a little bit. It was just a, really nice feature from above and from below as well. So I definitely like the tile breaches. With regards to the arches, I think that's one of the things I have the most trouble with. I don't think they are working, and what I would like to see is, the architects study reducing all of the arches all the way around the building and maybe creating, Commissioner Nugent talked about this a little bit, but like instead of having the repetition of the same thing all the way around, perhaps the entry points on each of the each of the sides of the block have some arch, and it would be a true arch. Right now, we have windows that don't even go all the way up to the arch. You can see in the image here that the glass stops, straight across horizontally, and they're just infilled with like spandrel panel or something, or something, or I'm not sure what. But so I don't think the arches are really serving the purpose that they could if they were really created, at entry points or at the point where there's some articulation, and then that could be, an arch that serves more function. The other thing is that they are at the 2nd floor, and the 1st floor is recessed. So you've got this arch that sort of like doesn't really have a base below it, because the base is recessed. So I really would like to see something different there. And I think the arches are an opportunity that could be improved upon. I think as I said, the roof line is nice and it's interesting and it's got the tile. I do like the detail Adam mentioned of the, can't remember what it's called, but the details of, below the eave there, or at the eave. But I feel like the towers are a little bit clunky, although Commissioner Nugent pointed out the facade that in the middle there that has, windows with a lot of wall space in between. I feel like that's a little bit the same with the towers. There's, I think, a couple of them. I feel like I'm not sure if there's one or two, but this one in particular adds a lot of height to the building and prominence to that corner, but it's not necessarily making that much sense to me because it has windows on one side. I don't know, it's not as well defined as what it is. So I'm not sure if that works for me. Let's see, regarding the color, I like the comments about a different color. Like it could be something that adds a little bit of a contemporary look, like, a white or an ivory or something. Maybe it's, maybe it has some dark brown detailing, or that trim at the eaves could be dark brown that could be carried somewhere else, or even black. So I think there's an opportunity to create something a little bit, with like a little bit of a contemporary look to this Mediterranean style. Like that a lot. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about the units. Floor plans were a little bit hard to read on this small screen that I use. But the units along the atrium, I think, will be dark and depressing, and I would not want to live in them. There is an atrium space that was a little hard for me to know how big it is, but you're looking, we've had other projects like this where you're looking out from your unit, And the studio units in particular, because they're kind of long and narrow, and sometimes the window space is even, well, there's even less windows, I guess. So you're looking out from your unit to, a wall across the atrium. And if you're on one of those lowest floors, you're a couple floors up before you even get any sunlight down to your unit. So the light and air in those units is pretty limited. And I really think that for quality of life, we should be taking a look at how to improve on that. I don't know. I don't think just increasing the atrium would do it. I feel like, I don't know. I always want to see if there's an opportunity to have a unit that goes through the hallway instead of just a double-loaded corridor. But then you lose units, so that's not so great. I guess I would like to take a look at how to make those units more enjoyable to live in. I think that's pretty much it. Parking is, of course, let's see, other design, downtown. Design revisions, I mean, the parking will be affecting the neighborhood. Reduce lower ceiling. I think I've kind of covered all my notes here. Ways to improve transition. And the only way I guess I would say to transition to the adjacent neighborhood would just be to step the building back at the lowest, at the street level, make the sidewalk a little bit bigger, make the commercial office space a little bit smaller, create a little bit more distance. I mean, that's all we could really do. I think that's it in terms of my comments. Let me just make sure. Oh, I guess I didn't talk about outdoor space. So I always sort of get hung up on outdoor space because it's a requirement. It just seems like, this is not a big urban city like, Chicago or New York or something. So those cities, you have to leave your building and, go a few blocks to a city park. I guess that's a little bit like what would be here, because there's not really attractive, usable outdoor space other than, yes, there's some balconies, which I think are great. Personally, I would use them. But the outdoor space is not kind of private, or how do I say it? I guess it's not like kind of welcoming. I mean, there are these balconies outside on the edges of the buildings over busy streets or whatever. So I don't mean the small balconies, I mean the public common spaces. So there's no like interior space that is a safe place to play, for instance, or, I mean, it's a very adult kind of building, I guess. And I guess that's just the way it is. I'm not sure how to, that would be something completely different unless there was a way to create a more of a sunlit courtyard in the middle. But, so that would be, I guess that's one of my concerns about this building. But it is walking distance to Central Park, so we rely on that a lot. So that's my comment on that. I think that's it. Otherwise, thank you for your presentation, and it's, it'll be an interesting project to see next time around.
Through the chair, is it okay if we give more comments?
I think so.
Okay, because as I've listened to both of you, I've thought of other things as well. Talking about the roof, I know it says on the material schedule it's tile, but I didn't realize it was tile from looking at the pictures, because it's not reading like tile to me. And that was going to be one of my comments, right? When you think of Mediterranean, you think of clay tile, or you think of terracotta tile. Is that what it's supposed to be? Is it just a bad render? Okay. Then I think that'll help a lot with making it look and feel Spanish or Mediterranean. I was going to note that people walk on Fifth because it feels safer, even though it's not safer. It doesn't feel like a highway. You know, there's 2 lanes, 2 road lanes, whereas when you go down to Fourth, there's 3. And maybe it's the lack of trees, maybe it's the 3rd lane, maybe it's that people drive faster on Fourth. But Fifth is the path because it just feels safer. And so when I think about having active ground floor uses, having uses on that ground plane where people would want to stop and gather, it makes more sense to put it on the Fifth Avenue side than the Fourth Avenue side. If I'm thinking of like downtown, we have a bunch of coffee shops and people sit out on the sidewalks and they drink their coffee. Like, I would not feel comfortable sitting on the sidewalk on the Fourth Avenue side because it just feels like a lot of fast traffic. But I would love to sit on the Fifth Avenue side. The Fifth Avenue side is pretty chill most of the time. And so, if you're thinking about where to place a limited amount of ground activation, I would do it on the Fifth Avenue side, because I think then also it's closer to the neighborhood. It's a little bit more convenient. I think you can make it feel more like a public gathering space, whereas the Fourth side does feel more of like a transit corridor, right, from downtown up. No, go for it, please. I like this part.
I think, I like to think of it as like, would I want to hang out there or would I want to hang out here? I mean, you try to picture yourself in the space, and
yeah.
I don't think that's necessary. Fourth isn't necessarily where to want to hang out.
I would not want to hang out on Fourth, but I would want to hang out on Fifth. And when you look at the corner cut-in, I was curious why the corner cut-in is on the Fourth side and not on the Fifth side. I don't know that you should do 2, because then I worry that it's going to start to look odd. Like, every corner can't have a cut-in, because the mass starts to look weird. But if you could, I don't know, think about maybe moving it to Fifth. It's one thing to consider. And then the other thing, I think this is more of a question for staff, but the pedestrian bulb outs on Fifth Avenue end on the residential side of Delaware. So when you actually cross onto the property where Safari Kids is, that's where there's no pedestrian bulb outs. And I'm curious if, as part of this project, that would trigger some sort of public works upgrade where we could add the pedestrian bulb outs to the Block 20 side of both Claremont and Delaware.
Sure, so through the chair, that'd be something staff would have to consider with the Public Works Department, know their standards as to when bulb outs are added or required.
Okay, great. Those were the only additional comments I had.
Thank you. Any additional comments from commissioners?
Just a couple quick ones. You reminded me, Margaret, that hello? There we go. I was not a fan of the towers myself either. I don't know how many there are, 2 or 3, but they seemed somewhat out of sorts. And I think it is important to reiterate Adam's point of where the spaces between the windows on those blank walls. I think that needs to be addressed. I think it just leaves it too wide open. That was it.
All right, great.
Thank you.
I think there's only one tower, maybe. I'm not sure. Okay, and Commissioner Nugent, do you have any additional comments?
I just wanted to know, I don't mind the tower, but I do fully agree that the windows on it are weird. I think it's a stairwell, but I could be wrong. And I think just getting the windows so that they feel more appropriate and there's less of a blank side, I'd find that to be a good improvement.
All right. Well, I think at this point then, we've all provided our comments and there's no further comments. We can close this issue. Great. Thank you so much for your time and your presentation, and we'll see you next time. All right. We'll close that item. Okay, so at this time, we can move on to reports and announcements.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Manira Sandhi, Planning Manager. I have a few quick ones for the Commission. So as you noted that you'd considered the Dragers project on November 17. That went before City Council on December 1st and was approved 4-0. I wanted to share that staff is also moving forward with housing element updates based on the 8CD response letter that we received, and we hope to present that through public hearings before Planning Commission and City Council in January. The Planning Commissioners Academy has released its dates for the end of March and may now be open for registration. So Ashley will be sending out an email just with the information on where it will be held, the dates, the program. So I understand some of the commissioners may already have indicated interest in attending. So if you can confirm that, then we can start getting you signed up for that academy.
Is that the one that was in San Ramon this year?
Yes, that was,
Yeah,
I believe there
feel
was one
like-
in San Ramon.
Where did this year go? I feel like that was just happening.
Right, and I'll have to look at the rules and procedures, but I believe we recommended planning commissioners do this regularly. I don't know if we specified a time, whether it's every year or once every 2 years. Yeah, that's what my understanding is, that it could be once every 2 years. So if you attended the one in San Ramon, perhaps you would want to pass on this one. It's, we can certainly
No.
look at. Mhm.
I attended the one in March 2020, like days before the shutdown. I was at a conference.
Those are always memorable, the days
And I'm like,
before
oh my
the
gosh,
pandemic.
Yeah.
Mhm, right.
The room full of people.
Yeah, that concludes staff's updates. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll adjourn this meeting.
Excuse me, so this is our last meeting for the year?
That is correct. So we are canceling the meeting that's over the holidays.
Okay.
Typically, staff has a practice for not having like commission meetings during that time. We also don't have like neighborhood meetings or do public noticing at that time, although our office and front counter will be open and we'll continue to provide, customer service and assistance.
Perfect. I'd like to take a minute and to compliment staff and my fellow commissioners for the incredible work throughout 2022. I am so honored to be part of this group, and the dedication and thoroughness that is presented at every single meeting is incredible. I think what we did this year, working on the housing element, working on quite a few different projects that we were able to expand the housing on some of them, and work through a lot of great projects and have some really profound impacts for the city. I think it was incredible that we were able to accomplish it, especially since there was quite a bit of outside chatter, which could distract you from your normal duties, where there was discussions of planning commissioners being removed from their positions, all the while still performing at the highest level. And I think that 2023 is going to be a great year for us. And I think getting through 2022 on the high professional level that we were able to was very impressive. So thank all of you.
Thank you for that. And thank you to staff for all you do too.
Yes, thank you to staff. Amazing job this year.
Yeah.
With all that
Thank you.
juggle.
Thank you so much. It's not easy, I'm sure.
Right. All right, with that, happy holidays, and we'll see you in the new year.
Have a good new year.
Meeting's adjourned.
Yes.